If you're a new home buyer or you haven't bought a home in a long time, you might wonder what it's like to work with a realtor and what that relationship looks like. Stay tuned and we'll talk about this. Hi, I'm Kelley Knitz of the Kelley Knitz Team. Thanks for joining me today. Anyway, the first thing that I do when I start working with a buyer is I sit down with them and I do what I call a buyer consultation. And that's where we sit down and get to know each other. And I try to find out what's important to that buyer and what they're looking for and what their time frame is. I tell them how I work and I go through a whole packet that I prepare that is chock full of good information. And one of the first things that we discuss is who represents whom in a real estate transaction. Upon first meeting with the buyer, or before you get too much information from them, it's required by the state that the agent talk to the buyer about agency and who represents whom in a transaction. And the agent can either represent the seller, or they can represent the buyer, or they can be a dual agent, which is more like being a facilitator. Agents are required to give their clients or the buyer, upon first meeting them, the Consumer Guide to Agency. And that, again, is a state required form, and it explains all different kinds of agency on it, and you're required to sign it before they show you a home. When I meet a buyer at one of my listings, I always represent the seller. I do not practice dual agency. And when I meet a buyer that's listed or that's not looking at one of my listings, then I act as a buyer's agent. And typically, if a buyer's out driving around, they sometimes make phone calls and they call the agent whose name is on the real estate sign. And that realtor actually has been hired by the seller to represent them for that real estate transaction. Another form of representation buyers should consider is legal representation. I think it's important when buying a home to have an attorney look over the closing statement, the title work, the mortgage note, and make sure that that everything is in order and that there are no glitches in the title work. Especially if the buyer is buying a bank-owned property. Many times, you'll have issues with that. So you want to make sure that they have the right legal description and that you're getting a free and clear title of the property. With the number of foreclosures available, many mistakes have been made, and an attorney should double check the work. And buying a home is such a big investment, it's well worth your cost of hiring an attorney. Just a little story about a buyer that I had that was buying a foreclosed home. We got through the inspection period and they spent money on the appraisal. She had about $1,000 into it with a septic and well inspection and all that. And lo and behold, the title work came in, and it turned out that they had foreclosed on the wrong property. They foreclosed on a neighbor's house. So this house was not available to purchase. They had to get the title and deed into their name in order for them to be able to convey it to that buyer, which was another 6 or 7 months. It's a big process to go through a foreclosure. So that was, a good reason to have had an attorney there, because the person or the title company who was doing the work on it, they were going to close it anyway because they were an out-of-town lender title company that they use that came into town. They said they were, that they were going to close it, but I had her get an attorney and he noticed this. So it was really, it could have been awful if they would have went ahead and closed and moved in and then found out that, that they didn't have rights to that house. So it is a good idea to have an attorney present, especially when buying a bank-owned property. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to share this information with you today. If you liked it and found it helpful, click the like button. And if you want to receive more videos as they become available, just subscribe below and we'll notify you when a new video becomes available. And if you have any stories or comments or know anyone who's been in trouble by not using an attorney at a closing, I would love to hear what those stories are. So just leave them in the comment section and I'd love to review that. Or if you have any questions, we can answer them as soon as possible. Thanks again for joining me today.